Every Wednesday at 10 a.m., Ray Carter would pull up to the same quiet street in front of the same small brick house. And every week, without fail, Margot Lane would step outside in her long beige coat, her silver hair pinned up neatly, floral scarf tied tight under her chin. She walked slowly, holding the cane more for balance than need. And she always smiled when she saw Ray waiting. "Good morning, darling," she'd say, her voice as soft as old velvet. Ray would open the passenger door like a chauffeur. "Morning, Miss Lane." Her perfume always smelled like lavender and memory. She sat in the front seat. Never the back. They didn't talk much the first few rides. But over time, she began sharing tiny stories about her late husband, her favorite author, the garden she used to keep. Ray never asked questions. He just drove. The hospital was only 10 minutes away. But she always asked to take the long route through the park. Said she liked the trees. Said she liked remembering. At the hospital, he'd park and step out to open her door. "How much today?" she'd always ask, pulling out a wrinkled leather coin purse. Ray would shake his head every time. "It's on me, Miss Lane." She'd protest, just a little. Then smile and say, "You spoil me, young man." And then she'd disappear into the building like a ghost from another time. Every Wednesday, for almost a year, they kept this ritual. Ray didn't tell anyone about her. Not his dispatcher. Not his friends. It wasn't a story he felt like sharing. But it became the best 10 minutes of his week. He never asked what her appointments were for. But he could tell. Her cheeks got paler. Her hands started to shake. Her stories became shorter. And then, one Wednesday, she didn't come out. He waited. 10 minutes. 15. He walked up to the front door and knocked gently. No answer. The porch light was off. The windows were dark. Ray stood there with his cap in his hands, heart heavier than it should have been. He drove off slowly, hoping it was just a scheduling mistake. But deep down, he knew. And what he didn't know yet was that her story with him wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Ray returned the next Wednesday. And the one after that. Still no sign of Margot. The third time, he parked across the street and waited for an hour. He didn't know why. Maybe he thought she'd come down the steps like nothing happened, smiling, scarf tied just right. But the curtain stayed closed. Eventually, a neighbor passed by walking a dog and paused at Ray's car. "You looking for Miss Lane?" Ray nodded. The man exhaled slowly. "She passed a few weeks ago." Quietly. "Hospice at home." Ray said nothing. The man gave a soft nod and walked on. Ray sat in the car for a long time, both hands on the wheel, staring at the front door like it might open anyway. There were no flowers on the porch. No funeral sign. No closure. He hadn't known her well. Not really. Just a quiet woman with a gentle voice and 1,000 unspoken stories. But he missed her. He missed the way she said darling. The way she asked to go the long way around the park. The way she always tried to pay. He started to wonder why it hurt so much. Ray went back to driving his normal routes. Airport runs. Grocery drop-offs. Late-night bar pickups. But every time Wednesday came, something in his chest ached. No one knew what he had lost. And there was no one to explain it to. One evening, almost 4 months later, Ray was sitting in his cab near the waterfront, watching the ferries come in, when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost let it ring out. But something told him to answer. Hello? The voice on the other end was calm. Male. Young, but not too young. Is this Ray Carter? Yeah. My name is Eli. Eli Lane. I believe you used to drive my mother, Margot. Ray sat up straighter. Yes, sir. I did. There was a pause. Then Eli said, I've been trying to track you down. She left your name in a note before she passed. She said, find Ray Carter. The driver who never took my money. He took care of me when no one else noticed. Ray didn't know what to say. Eli continued, she used to talk about you when I called from overseas. She said you were the only person who treated her like she still mattered. Ray cleared his throat. I just gave her a ride. No, Mr. Carter, Eli said gently. You gave her dignity. There was silence again. Then Eli asked, would you be willing to meet? I'd like to thank you properly. Ray hesitated. He'd never met her family. Never thought he would. But something inside him, grief or guilt or something deeper, whispered yes. All right, Ray said. Tell me where. They met at a quiet cafe just off the main street. Ray arrived early, like always. Wore his cleanest plaid shirt, tucked in this time. Left the cap in the car. He sat by the window, hands folded on the table. Nervous. At exactly 5 p.m., a man in a navy coat walked in, tall, well-groomed, confident in the way people who've traveled the world often are. Ray, the man asked gently. Ray stood. You must be Eli. They shook hands. Eli's grip was firm, but not forceful. They Saturday. Neither rushed. After a moment, Eli pulled out a small notebook from his coat and placed it on the table. It's hers, he said. She kept notes. Stories. Memories. The one she never told anyone else. Ray looked down at the notebook. Faded blue cover. Edges soft with age. She wrote about me, he asked quietly. Eli nodded. Every week. After every ride. She called you the man who didn't ask questions. Ray smiled, just barely. She liked that, Eli continued. She said you didn't treat her like a dying woman. You treated her like a passenger. Like a person. Ray nodded slowly, his throat tight. Eli opened the notebook to a marked page and slid it toward him. Ray leaned forward and read. Today, Ray let me cry and didn't ask why. He just drove slower. He knew without knowing. I think that's what grace looks like. Not fixing. Just being there. Ray swallowed hard. I didn't know she was sick, he said. Not at first. She didn't want anyone to know. She hated pity. Ray nodded. Yeah. I could tell. They sat quietly for a moment. Then Eli reached into his bag again and pulled out an envelope. This is for you. Ray hesitated. No, I didn't. It's not payment, Eli said. It's a gift. From her. She left it in her will. Specifically stated it was for the man who gave me time when I had so little left. Ray stared at the envelope. Inside, a check. The number stunned him. More than what he made in a year. I can't accept this. You already did, Eli said softly. She wrote this part in capital letters. He won't want it. Give it to him anyway. Ray exhaled. Looked out the window. Do you know what she said her favorite part of Wednesdays was? Eli added. Ray shook his head. the long way through the park. She said the trees made her feel like she was still alive. Ray smiled. She said no one had ever let her enjoy silence like that. There was nothing left to say. Only gratitude. And grief. And the strange ache of being remembered more deeply than you realized. A week later, Eli called again. "Would you mind coming to the house?" he asked. "There's something you should see." Ray hesitated. Then agreed. The house hadn't changed. Same brick walls. Same narrow walkway lined with fading rose bushes. Only now, the porch light was on again. Eli opened the door. Inside, the air felt still. Not dusty, just quiet, like the walls hadn't been spoken to in months. "Come in," Eli said, stepping aside. Ray removed his shoes, instinctively. Followed him down a narrow hallway, past framed black and white photos. One of Margot holding a baby boy. Another of her on a bicycle, laughing, scarf flying behind her. "She kept everything," Eli murmured. "I didn't realize how much until I came back." They stopped in front of a closed door. Eli turned the handle and opened it slowly. It was a small room. Not quite a bedroom. More like a sitting room converted into a space of comfort. A recliner near the window. A small bookshelf. A radio. And in the corner, a glass cabinet. Ray stepped closer. Inside were tiny objects. A pressed lavender flower. A folded paper crane. A miniature figurine of a yellow taxi. And tucked at the back, a photo of Ray's cab parked outside the house, taken from the porch window. Ray stared. "She called this her Wednesday shelf," Eli said. "Every item had a story. Every ride with you gave her something to hold onto." Ray felt his chest tighten. "I didn't know I meant that much." "She said you were the only constant during her final year," Eli said. "Even when her body gave out, she said your cab made her feel ordinary. And that made her feel alive." Ray turned toward the window. The park trees visible in the distance. "She never told me." "She didn't need to," Eli said gently. "She lived it." Ray moved toward the bookshelf. A few of the novels he'd seen her carry. A notebook sat on top, different from the first one. Labeled Final Things. "She wrote about dying?" he asked. Eli shook his head. "No. She wrote about what she wanted to remember." Ray opened to the last page. "If I go tomorrow, let them know this, I wasn't alone." A man in a yellow cab made sure of that. Every ride was a goodbye. And he made each one feel less like an ending and more like a passage. Ray closed the notebook gently, hands trembling. Some people live loud lives. Others leave quietly, but echo forever. As they stepped back into the hallway, Eli paused beside a small side table near the door. He picked up an old keyring. 2 keys. One slightly rusted. "She left this for you too," Eli said, offering it to Ray. Ray looked down at them, confused. "I don't understand." "She rented a garage downtown. Stored a few things there. Said it was for Ray's future, not mine. I figured it was a mistake. But she insisted in her will." Ray hesitated, then took the keys. Later that afternoon, Ray drove to the address Eli had written down. It was a row of old storage units near the edge of town. Quiet. Isolated. He found the right one. Number 17. Inserted the key. The door rolled up slowly. Inside was a perfectly maintained 1976 Checker Marathon cab. Yellow paint, polished chrome, clean leather interior. The kind of taxi you only saw in movies or museums now. Ray stood frozen. There was a folded note taped to the driver's seat. He stepped in and opened it. For the man who carried me without asking. This one's for your next chapter. If anyone deserved to drive something beautiful, it's you. It wasn't just a car. It was a message. That his kindness had not gone unnoticed. That he hadn't just been passing time. That he mattered. He sat in the front seat for a while, hands on the steering wheel, remembering her voice. Good morning, darling. Her perfume. The way she took the long way through the park, not because she was late, but because she wanted to feel something longer. Ray started the engine. It hummed like it had been waiting for him all this time. He drove it out onto the empty road, slow at first. Then through the park route. Just like she used to ask. Only now, she was the one in his memory, and he was the one taking the long way. A few weeks later, Ray was back on the road. Not in his old cab. In hers. The vintage yellow taxi turned heads everywhere he went. Some people smiled. Some took photos. But to Ray, it wasn't about the car. It was about who had gifted it to him. Why she had done it. He no longer took dispatch calls. He started something new. Just one day a week. Wednesdays. He called it Memory Rides. He put up a small flyer at the hospital Margot used to visit. Free rides for anyone visiting a loved one in care. Or anyone who just needs a quiet ride and someone to listen. No questions asked. No money taken. That Wednesday morning, an older man climbed into the passenger seat. Nervous. Said he was visiting his wife. She'd been in a coma for 2 weeks. Ray drove the long way around the park. The man didn't speak much. But when they arrived at the hospital, he turned and said, "You're the first person I've spoken to today." Ray just nodded. Another week, a young nurse on her lunch break. Another week, a boy visiting his grandfather. And each time, Ray took the long way. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. But something happened in that passenger seat. Like Margot had left her spirit there. Like Grace had moved in and refused to leave. One night, as Ray was cleaning out the cab, he found a folded piece of paper under the seat. Not his handwriting. Not new. Margot's. He recognized it instantly. It must have slipped from her purse, long ago. He unfolded it carefully. It was a quote, hand-copied in her handwriting. "We all die. The goal isn't to live forever. The goal is to create something that will." Chuck Palahniuk. Ray folded it again and tucked it in his shirt pocket. Some things? You don't need to understand. You just need to carry forward. It was a rainy Wednesday afternoon when the boy got in the car. Couldn't have been more than 14. Hoodie soaked. Eyes tired in that way only grief could explain. Ray glanced at him in the rear view. "Where to?" The boy mumbled, "St. Jude's Hospice." Ray nodded. "Turn the key." They drove in silence for a while. The boy stared out the window, lips pressed into a line. Ray didn't push. He knew that silence better than most. Halfway through the park, the boy finally spoke. "You knew her, didn't you?" Ray glanced back. "Who?" The boy looked up. "Margot Lane." Ray's hands tightened on the wheel. He nodded slowly. "I did." "She was my grandmother," the boy said. "I didn't visit much. My mom and her had history." Ray waited. She left me a letter. Said if I ever needed to feel close to her, I should find the man in the yellow cab who knew how to listen. Ray's throat closed. She said, the boy added, voice cracking slightly, that you'd never ask me to talk. But that if I wanted to, you'd still hear me. Ray blinked hard. The boy looked away again. So I got in. They reached the hospice. The boy didn't move at first. Then, without turning his head, he whispered, did she talk about me? Ray thought for a moment. Then said, she never stopped. The boy nodded once, then stepped out of the car. But just before closing the door, he looked back in and said, thanks for being her safe place. And then he ran through the rain toward the entrance. Ray sat there for a long while. Wipers sliding back and forth. The cab quiet, but filled with the ghost of a woman who had left behind more than memories. She had left ripples. And Ray, just a driver, was now part of something far bigger than any route on the map. It started with an email. From a journalist at a local paper. The subject line read, taxi driver honors memory of former passenger through kindness. Ray almost deleted it. But something told him to read. The email was from a nurse at St. Jude's. She'd been one of Margot's caregivers. She'd read the flyer. Then ridden in Ray's cab with her mother, who had terminal cancer. She wrote, you don't know me. But you made space in your cab for my mother's grief, for my fear, and for silence. I didn't know that was possible in this world anymore. She asked for a short interview. Ray declined. She wrote again, gently. Said it wasn't about publicity. It was about honoring Margot. That word made him pause. A few days later, the article came out anyway. The man who drove her home, a taxi driver's weekly gift of grace. It went viral. Not because Ray tried to be noticed, but because people were starving for stories like his. Stories about people who didn't fix, or preach, or sell anything. Just showed up. Then came the invitation. A foundation Margot had donated to for decades had started a new initiative in her name, the Quiet Grace Award. And Ray? He was the first recipient. He didn't want to go. He hated suits. Hated attention. But Eli called and said, she would have wanted you to stand in the light just once. Just to know what it feels like. Ray stood in front of the mirror the night before the event, wearing a borrowed suit, buttoned wrong the first time. He looked tired. Older than he remembered. But when he put on the old watch Margot had gifted him, the one he never wore, he suddenly didn't feel old. He felt seen. The ceremony was quiet. Simple. He didn't prepare a speech. He just stepped up, holding the small plaque with her name on it, and said, I'm not good at words. But I guess what I've learned is this, sometimes the most ordinary moments become someone else's lifeline. You never know who's holding on by a thread. Be the kind of person who doesn't make them tie knots alone. And that was it. The room stood still. And then, slowly, they clapped. But Ray didn't care about the applause. He just looked down at her name on the award. And whispered, you're still riding with me. A month after the award ceremony, Ray returned home late on a Wednesday night. He locked up the yellow cab like he always did, carefully, reverently. It had stopped being a vehicle. It was a vessel now. A moving memory. As he stepped into his small apartment, something caught his eye on the floor. A cream envelope. No stamp. No address. Just one handwritten line. For Ray. From her. He sat down slowly, hand shaking. The handwriting was familiar. Margot's. Inside the envelope was a single sheet, folded neatly, smelling faintly of lavender. He unfolded it. Dear Ray, if you're reading this, it means I've left this world. I hope I left it softer for someone, maybe you. I always wanted to write you something proper, but words felt too small when I tried. So instead, I'll tell you this. You reminded me that kindness still exists in places where no one is looking. You reminded me that silence can be sacred. You gave me my final year without pity or performance. You let me be just. Margot. And that was the greatest gift. I hope you keep driving. I hope you keep noticing. And I hope, one day, someone gives you what you gave me. Grace. Without asking. With all my heart. Margot. Ray sat there for a long time. No music. No clock ticking. Just that letter in his lap. He didn't cry right away. He just stared at her name. Not as a memory, but as something still unfolding inside him. The next morning, he taped the letter to the inside of the glove compartment in the cab, so that every time he opened it, he'd remember why he still drove. The city didn't change. The road stayed cracked. The sky still hung heavy with wires. People still rushed past each other like moments didn't matter. But for Ray Carter, everything had changed. Every time he turned the ignition, he remembered her. Every Wednesday, he polished the old cab with care, tied a fresh floral scarf to the rearview mirror, hers, and left the passenger seat open. Some days, no one came. Other days, someone sat beside him, full of grief or silence or hope. And Ray would just drive. He no longer needed maps. He didn't care about destinations. Only the journey. And always? The long way. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the skyline, Ray pulled up to the park. Empty cab. Windows down. He turned off the engine. Let the stillness speak. He looked to the seat beside him. For just a moment, just long enough to forget it wasn't real, he imagined her there. Margot. In her beige coat. Her scarf tied tight. Lavender scent lingering in the air. She smiled, not with her mouth, but with her eyes. And he whispered to the empty seat. Still with me, who? He turned the key again. And the cab rolled forward, headlights slicing softly through the dusk. No destination. No rush. Just one man carrying quiet grace through a noisy world.
If you believe in the power of compassion, resilience and human connection, be sure to subscribe to the Robbie Stories and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story that could change your day or even your life. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and remember, some stories don't just entertain, they heal.